Hello and welcome back to the Fallon Moran Show. All right, so there has been a topic sitting on me today, and I've been up since 2:45. I did not sleep at the hospital last night, so of course, before I left the hospital, something happened, and I started to get concerned and worried, and so naturally, on my night off, I got no sleep because I wasn't in the place where I was hoping to be to calm my anxiety. In any case, since I've been up, I've been thinking about this topic of actually a question I have asked myself of how to create relatability out of a completely unrelatable situation. And so I want to dive into that on my drive to work because I have maybe 40 minutes to chat about this, and I think it's a really important topic of conversation, especially when you're in online business and you're saying things to yourself like, oh, well, nobody can relate to my situation. And that's just a belief that you have on repeat in the back of your mind. So I want to actually uncover it for myself while uncovering it, like debunking it, I guess is a better word for you. So where I want to start is with my completely unrelatable situation. There are very few people in the world who have a 2-year-old who's diagnosed with cancer, who are also pregnant and starting a business. And we could go on and on with the list of other things that are going on in my life that are on fire right now. And let's just stop there for a second, because I feel like that's a very small percentage of people already. So it's a very unrelatable situation. However, there is a way to create relatability out of it. And the way that I understand and perceive creating relatability out of it is by an example of what happened last night before I left. Now, I told you that something happened before I left that was slightly concerning because going into the 3rd round of treatment, my main priority was to keep Penelope healthy. So keep her in the room, prevent her from going outside of the room, keep her away from people who might have a tickle in their throat or a little sniffle in their nose, and, make sure that when we do have any kind of dressing change or we are doing anything that would require a sterile lab, that we take care of that correctly. We keep her on the right antibiotics so that the bacteria that is natural to her does not reinfect her, et cetera, et cetera. That was the plan going into the 3rd round of treatment. And last night, something happened. She just went to the bathroom, and I had been asking the question since early on this week of when are we going to put her on this GI medicine, because she's been on the GI medicine the last 2 cycles of treatment, and the doctors don't want to necessarily over-medicate her. However, they were like, at the first sign of any kind of issue going to the bathroom, you let us know. And so yesterday, right before I left, Penelope, it sounded like she took a tumble, and it was just her making a massive bowel movement. And of course, I was very concerned because it was the night that I wanted to go home and get a good night's sleep for myself. And so I went outside and I told the nurse, and the nurse told the doctor. I went back into our room and I grabbed our stuff so I could go run the laundry and I could take my wallet and everything with me. And on my way out, one of the nurses was like, "What's going on with you?" And so when I say create relatability out of a completely unrelatable situation, the first thing that I did was tell them a story. Tell them a story that they can relate to. Tell them a story that they would have maybe found themselves in at one point in their own either nursing career or in their own life. And tell them a story about how the finish line is so close and then something happens and you're like, oh, now it feels as if the finish line is being taken right out of my sight and it's being pushed further back. And so creating relatability in a story is an impressive and effective way to get people to understand where you're coming from and what you're going through, because whether it's the same situation or not, whether the circumstance looks exactly the same as mine or it's completely different, the feeling remains the same. It's the feeling of looking at the finish line and knowing you're in the home stretch and something happens and you're you're like, I have to do it all over again, or now I have an extra however many minutes, or whatever the case may be. People have felt that before. People have felt like the finish line has been pushed back for them before, and people can relate to that story. So that was the first thing that I did to create relatability amongst a completely unrelatable situation. And the second thing that I want to dive into is something that has been said before. So using like a motivational or inspirational phrase or saying, or something that somebody has said, maybe like an idiom or an axiom. Somebody said something and it relates to this situation, thus creating relatability amongst other people. So when we were getting to the end of the conversation between the nurses and myself so that I could go home, one of the things that I had said was, oh, I saw this thing one time about how our trauma creates our humor. Like our trauma is responsible for what makes us funny. And what happened? Everybody started to bust out laughing. And it was so incredibly funny because they're like, it's so true. And they can relate to it. Now, our traumas are not the same, obviously. I'm in the hospital as an adult with my child who's fighting and beating cancer, and they may have gone through something different when they were in school, in nursing school, and they had, a traumatic experience during a clinical period. In any case, the trauma is what makes you funny, and you can sit back and you can laugh about it because you can relate to it. You can relate to that axiom. You can relate to that saying, that phrase, whatever you want to call it. And so it's creating relatability out of a completely unrelatable situation. And instead of sitting in your current position and saying, oh, well, nobody's going to relate to my life, or my life is so boring, or I'm not funny, or blah, 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 blah. Oftentimes, what I like to do is exactly what I'm doing right now. Take a step back from what it is that I'm struggling with, or what it is that I'm saying about the situation, and look at the actual scenario that played out in real life. Because whether you know it or not, you probably are a lot funnier than you give yourself credit for. And your life is probably very, very relatable, because if you're a mom who has 2 kids and is basically running around like a chicken with your head cut off, trying to do everything to keep the house upright and clean and taken care of, while also taking care of yourself and 2 tiny humans, and you have ambitions to free your time, your flexibility to work anywhere, and your financial ability to do things that you know that you want to do, whether it's provide for your vacations, provide for your kids' education, being able to work from anywhere in the world, whatever the case may be. It's an extremely relatable situation when you find yourself sitting at 10:30 at night in front of your TV at the edge of your bed, just staring with your eyes wide open into nothingness as your kids are bouncing off the walls in their own rooms because they can't fall asleep. It's an extremely relatable situation. And you can take that scenario, you can take that circumstance, that event, you can create a story out of it, and you can teach something out of it, like what I'm doing right now. You can create it. And it takes sometimes opening our minds up to, or flipping our perspectives on, what we are believing or thinking about ourselves at the time. So I want you to take a situation that you feel like is completely unrelatable, or it's boring, or it's not funny, or it's just so fucking random. And I want you to pick an actual instance in your life, like something that happened on Monday. And I want you to ask yourself, what's the story about this topic? And what can I take away? What can I share with other people about what happened? Because then what you're doing is you're creating relatability, you're educating your audience on something that has to do with what you do as an online business owner, a content creator, a digital expert. and you're sharing that in your content. And that's how you create relatability out of a completely unrelatable situation. So I want to thank you for tuning in. I want to thank you for taking in those 2 tips and unraveling this in real time with me and coming along for, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 minutes of my ride. I think it's actually 10. However, by the time I'm done recording and I say thank you and don't forget to leave a review and all the other things, it'll probably be closer to 15. So thank you. Don't forget to leave a review if you haven't left a review already. And I'll talk to you soon.